Hi, my name is Bruno Moreland and I teach AP African American Studies. And in this series, I'm going to go over all the required sources of the AP African American Studies curriculum. And today we're looking at Unit 1.10, and we're talking about kinship and political leadership. And specifically, we're really looking at female political leadership in two regions of sub-Saharan Africa. The first required source comes to us from Benin, which is in modern-day Nigeria. It is an ivory mask of Queen Idia. This mask is from the 16th century, and it depicts Queen Idia, who was the mother of Oba Esigie. There's other sculptures of the head of Queen Idia, and most of them are in bronze or some other type of copper alloy, as was typical of the region. This is the same Benin that produced the Benin bronzes, and no, it is not in the place of modern-day country of Benin. But this mask is different than the sculptures of Queen Idia's head made out of bronze because of the material. Ivory, being white, is supposed to signify purity, and it's also supposed to liken her to the god of the sea, Olokun. The portrayal of Queen Idia in this sculpture is typical to the other depictions. One of the most prominent things that you might see here is the two scars that are at the front of her forehead. This is a practice called scarification. There's two possible reasons for why she might have had these two scars on her head. In the first story stems from her parents. They're the ones that made the two scars on her forehead because they wanted to discourage the marriage between her and the Oba. But because the rest of her beauty and her intellect outshone those two scars, the Oba still married her and she gave birth to one of his sons. The other story about the scarification is that the two scars lay where they thought was the spiritual center. So it's demarked someone who had great spiritual power. On the rest of this sculpture, you'll see some very intricately carved out details. Along the collar and the tiara, there was carved mudfish and bearded Portuguese merchants. Queen Idia's son, Oba Esigie, would have worn this as a pendant during religious rituals, but now these types of sculptures and pendants are worn during yearly or annual rituals of purification. One of the reasons why Queen Idia is so important is because of the work that she did to help her son rise to the level of king. Idia was one of the Oba's many wives, and when the Oba died, she helped her son position himself to take over the throne. He was not the firstborn, so he had less claim to the throne, but she had pushed him to live in the capital city and have more interactions with the Portuguese who were now making contact with sub-Saharan Africa. As a result of this dispute in the succession of the king, a civil war amongst the Edo people came out, and while the war was going on, another regional rival of the Edo people, the Kingdom of Igala, entered into Benin. While her son was fighting the civil war, Queen Idia raised an army on her own and marched them to face the Igala kingdom. In this battle against the Kingdom of Igala, she was said to have inspired the troops and also used her spiritual powers to give them an advantage as they went into battle. As a result, in 1505, her son, Oba Esigie, rose to the throne and gave her an unprecedented place as the Queen Mother. Usually, after an Oba rose to the throne, they lost a lot of the contact that they used to have with their mother. And because Oba Esigie was pretty much indebted to her mother for helping him attain the throne, he continued to praise her and contact her and use her as an advisor while he ruled. He built her a palace, and this set a precedent for how queen mothers would be treated into the future. It also set a precedent and a new standard for the depiction of women and Benin and Edo people's art. Prior to this, most of the arts depicted only men or warriors, and as a result of the rise of Queen Idia's importance in the royal family, more women were then being depicted in these Benin bronzes. Queen Idia is just one example of a woman who leveraged the regional rivalries, the traditional customs, and the arrival of the Portuguese to put themselves and their family members into a better position. We're going to see another example in which a female leader fought skillfully and resisted the Portuguese incursions to maintain sovereignty of her people. So that comes to us with the picture of Queen Njinga. Njinga was born in 1583 and died in 1663. She was born to one of the kings, so she was already born as part of the royal family. She was thought to be the favorite of her father. The traditional belief is that she was born feet first, and this was a significant omen for what was to come in her life. Her father helped train her in matters of state, in the military, and ruling, and as a result, she was the subject of jealousy amongst her siblings. When her father died, one of her half-brothers assumed the throne. His name was Ngola Mbande. And because he was jealous and suspicious of the rest of his family members, he had the rest of his brothers and nephews murdered so that they wouldn't be able to challenge him into the throne, including Njinga's son. When this happened, Njinga was enraged, but she bided her time, knowing that she was going to have time to enact her revenge later on. Because of all her prior training, her brother sent her to the coast to negotiate with the Portuguese for future trade relationships between their empire and the new European power. This is where we get the most famous story of Njinga. Supposedly, when she goes to negotiate with the Portuguese governor, the governor is sitting in a big velvet chair and is expecting Njinga to sit on the floor while they negotiate this agreement. But because she was confident in her status as part of the royal family, she demanded that one of her servants kneel down and serve as her chair for the several hours of negotiations that followed. The negotiation was successful. They ended up coming up with a trading agreement and secured peace between the two powers, at least for the meantime. As a way to mark the successful negotiation of this agreement, she was baptized into the Catholic Church and took on a Catholic name. In 1624, Njinga's brother dies, and he leaves his 8-year-old son to the throne. There is suspicion that Queen Njinga was the one that had him killed. But she took this as an opportunity and acted as the boy king's regent, meaning that she was going to handle all the state affairs until the boy grew up. Eventually, she has the boy murdered and assumes the throne for herself. For nearly the rest of Njinga's life, her life is defined by the opposition to the Portuguese and resisting their incursion to try to maintain her people's sovereignty. So she conducted raids against the Portuguese, and they continued to go further inland to try and pursue her. By the 1630s, she recruits the nearby Imbagala and assumes their ways and traditions. Whenever she engaged in negotiations with the Portuguese, she made sure to avoid a vassal status between her kingdom and the Portuguese. That means that they weren't going to pay a tribute or a tax to the Portuguese to ensure that there continued to be a peace. He even recruited the rivals of the Portuguese, the Dutch, to try and expel the Portuguese from the continent. This isn't so far-fetched because the Portuguese were temporarily expelled from their colonies in Brazil by the Dutch. In 1656, she finally makes peace with the Portuguese, and by 1661, she's recognized as a Christian sovereign by the Catholic Church. She adopted the fashion styles of other European kings and monarchs, wearing velvet and robes. And in 1663, just 2 years afterwards, she dies of an infection while she is in her 80s. The picture that the College Board gives us is from the time in which Queen Njinga is adopted by the Imbagala. The captions in the picture are written in early modern Italian, and it's labeled "initiated as Yaga," which would be a shortened or different word for Imbagala during this time period. Her status as a warrior is denoted by her holding the bow and arrow, and her popularity amongst her people can be seen as she's praised walking through this procession. So that's it for these 2 required sources in this topic of AP African American Studies. I hope you come back in the next video in which we talk about the topic 1.11, Global Africans. Thank you.